Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Raw Podcast. Phil and James here. Phil, how's things today? This fine Tuesday morning, a bit grim outside.
I was going to say, it doesn't really feel like July in the pre-season fixtures near, and does it? But never mind.
Yeah, semi-finals today and tomorrow. What are your predictions for that?
I think France will beat Spain, even though Spain will be the best team in the tournament, and I love watching them. I think France will grind out England, Netherlands. I think England will beat Netherlands. I think I've not been hugely impressed with the Netherlands, and although I've not been particularly impressed with England either. I think the best defensive teams tend to go through. So I fancy France and England for what I don't think will be a very exciting final from what we've seen in this tournament so far. There we go. You put me on the spot there. This is gonna be great for people who listen on Thursday and Friday and are preparing for Spain Netherlands Euros final.
Yeah, I think France will probably grind it out as well. And I haven't been too impressed with the Dutch so far, so I'd probably back England. But you just never know. Tournament football, it's very exciting. And then we have South Shields and Gateshead on Saturday. The footballing feast continues this summer, Phil.
I think it's I think it's always a good one for fans, isn't it? It's like I enjoyed it last year. It was a good day.
Oh, I loved it. Brilliant.
Really good to sort of. I think it's like nice for the club to be, very much out there in the local football community, and as well, it's always an exciting day because the way they split the squad, I think it means you guarantee to see loads of exciting young players, and I think that's always a really cool thing. I remember last year we were at South Shields and Treog and Sugi. Did he crash one off the crossbar? I think it was a brilliant
Yeah,
save or something. And
he hit the bar within about 3 seconds of being on the pitch.
yeah, and it was just I like the games because I think it's always really nice to see the youngsters in that sort of senior environment. And it's a really nice glimpse of the future, and obviously it's got added interest this weekend because it's the first time we're going to see Regis Lebrice's sort of input, if you like. Obviously, it's very early days, and it's not going to be the team that faces Cardiff on the first day of the season. But there will absolutely be some clues because if you read what he's been saying, if you look at what Ligo 9 was saying with the club media last week, from day one, pretty much, he's been really clear on how he wants the team to play, and a huge amount of the training has been focused on his philosophy and his tactical approach. And so, although it won't be the finished article, I think we will definitely get some pretty early clues on Saturday. So I think it will genuinely be a really interesting one to follow.
Yeah, I like a good double header as well. It's you don't often get to say that you've watched two Sunderland games in one day, so it's a bit of a novelty in that regard. Transfers, Phil, we should probably talk about. You had a story today on Alan Browne, former Preston North End, very experienced Championship midfielder, Republic of Ireland international as well. What is the latest regarding that?
Yeah, there's obviously a story on the Echo and on my Twitter page, which people can go and look into. But pretty straightforward, really. Browne is a free agent. He was offered a 3-year deal by Preston earlier this year. They said it was basically, their manager Ryan Lowe's on record saying it was the best contract they've ever offered. Understand he's had a lot of interest from elsewhere in the Championship, also from Turkey. We don't know where he's going to go yet, but my understanding is that the Sunderland are very keen. He's been up to Sunderland. He's had pretty positive talks with the club. And so it's, while it's not a done deal, it's one that potentially could happen. It is an interesting one. Obviously, we know Lebrice and Speakman both spoke last week at his first press conference about how the club were looking for that little bit of Championship experience. But if it gets done, and it's a big if, for me, it's a big box ticked earlier in the summer. Browne isn't a defensive midfielder. He's very energetic. He's very combative. He likes to get around the pitch. He's got an eye for goal as well. But I think if you had a wish list for most Sunderland fans at the start of the summer, a experienced Championship midfielder, I think would have been very, very, very high up there. Probably after a striker, if we're honest, that would be number one. But I think this kind of signing would very much be next on the list. And I think there's pretty clear indications that Sunderland understand there's a need for that kind of player. We know, obviously, as well, there's been an interest in former Sheffield United midfielder Oliver Norwood. From my understanding, and again, these things can change very quickly, which I'm sure people appreciate, it sounds like this Browne one is more advanced than that. But we'll obviously wait and see how that shakes out. There can be a lot of twists and turns, especially with free agents, because they get so much interest and there's always a chance someone will come in and sort of blow you out of the water. But Yeah, my initial understanding and my initial feeling is that this is quite a ambitious move, actually, and it's a little bit of an indicator that, while the strategy isn't going to change generally at Sunderland this summer, there is a little bit of flexibility in play here, because make no mistake, if they get this over the line, this will, although he's a free agent, this wouldn't be a cheap deal by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I like this for a number of reasons. I don't know if you've had a chance to look into it yet, Phil, but his injury record is absolutely superb, or lack of an injury record, really. Since Preston were promoted from League One at the end of the 2014-15 season, I think Browne has only played less than 40 times twice in these sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, I think about 10 seasons since then. One was 39 games, all appearances. The other was 35. He's generally fit. He generally makes over 40 appearances a season in all competitions for Preston North End. And we saw that was a massive problem with Corey Evans and Bradley Dack, wasn't it? That while Corey Evans contributed to Sunderland and was good when fit, when he was fit, it was few and far between. And Dack was a similar issue that I think he only ended up playing 16 or 17 times for Sunderland. So it makes sense in that regard as well. A good age as well, 29, but has sort of 414 total appearances across his career. It's a very, very positive deal that seems to make a lot of sense if it comes off, that is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a really good point. I think it's a point we've made a couple of times on this podcast, actually, which is actually the main issue last season wasn't necessarily that there weren't enough experienced players. It's just that they were never on the pitch. They were never available. And I think naturally, if you want your experienced players to be big voices in the dressing room, I think that's quite difficult when they're injured a lot. I can, loads of people around the academy, I spoke to loads of people who said what a good character Bradley Dack was, how good he was with the younger players, how good his energy was. But you're never going to get the best version of him as sort of a leader and a dressing room voice if he's not on the pitch regularly. And I think if you think about it, it makes total sense, doesn't it? Because you would feel a little... I don't think you're going to be calling people out or demanding this or demanding that if you're not in the team. So I think that is an important point. I don't want to jinx either this deal or his injury records. I'm going to proceed tentatively, but yeah, I think it's fair to say that we're cautiously optimistic in terms of, after a dismal end to last season and a tricky start to the summer, there's been a few really good things happened at the club in terms of the Chris Rigg deal. The improvements that we're starting to see in retail, albeit that's still obviously very early days. And I think if they can get this done, and let's vary it out a bit. Let's say it's not Alan Browne and it ends up being somebody else. I think the sign that there's a clear concerted effort to address what was an obvious shortcoming last season, is a definite positive. And I think that's a positive for fans, whether or not this actually comes off. I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
No, absolutely, and it's pleasing as well, because I think like a lot of fans over the past 3 or 4 windows have maybe thought that they were seeing something different to the football club in terms of what Sunderland needed to bring in. But now it just seems like there's a little bit more alignment, to use the buzzword of the day. And these sort of things make sense, and as what Sunderland fans have been calling for a while. We'll stay on the transfer theme, Phil. We're going to run through some predictions later on as well. But there was a little bit of transfer news yesterday from Fabrizio Romano. Jobe Bellingham looks set to stay at Sunderland. Obviously, interest from Brentford, Crystal Palace, I think, pushed quite hard. For me, Phil, that one just seems to make a whole load of sense. Still at a very tentative age in his development. We forget that he started the season as a 17-year-old, over 40 appearances last season for Sunderland. Did look a little tired at times, but still chipped in, I think, with 8 goal contributions. It might have been 8 goals, actually. I'm not sure what he did assist-wise, but possibly even in a double check. For me, it just makes sense for him to stay and grow for another season and then reassess in the summer. I don't feel like there's any reason to rush this, and it seems like Jude agrees. Jobe even, sorry. I'm in the habit of referencing Jude at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things on this. One is, and this isn't me doubting the information at all, which I have absolutely no doubt is correct, but it is July the 9th. So there are almost 2 full months to go, and you can make a decision and have the clearest vision, and then somebody comes in with an absolutely insane offer on deadline day in September and everything gets upended. So that's the one slight sort of that's the one slight asterisk I'd put on this. And actually, when we spoke to Christian Speakman last week, he said, I'm not going to go, this was before this news had sort of developed or emerged. And he said, I'm not going to go into individuals because the market can be crazy and things can chop and change so quickly. So I don't think we should say for certain that a line has been drawn under this, but hopefully, it certainly seems like the direction of travel is very much that Joe wants to stay. I completely agree with you. I felt that this summer was too soon for him. I said that, that was my opinion as soon as Romano first brought the news of Crystal Palace's interest earlier this summer. I think for me, there's an example that I would use would be Jack Clarke last summer. So now, obviously, I know there are huge differences in their stories. Clarke, obviously, he's already had that big move, which didn't work out and had to rebuild his career. He was a bit older. But last summer, Burnley, we know, were putting in bids for Jack Clarke and wanted to sign Jack Clarke. And actually what Jack Clarke felt and where him and Sunderland sort of agreed in the conversations he had with Tony Mowbray was, you're potentially going into a Burnley side where you might not yet be guaranteed to play every week. And therefore, there's a danger that a year down the line, you're pretty much back where you started. You might not have been a regular at the Premier League. You don't know what Burnley's, as it happened, they ended up getting relegated.
It looks a good decision.
The feeling then was, if you have another full season at Championship level, the perception of you is going to change if you do well, because then you're potentially going to a Premier League team pretty much as a starter. You might be able to lift the kind of clubs that want to sign you. It might not be those sort of promoted teams anymore. It might actually be that established mid-table team. And you go there knowing that you've got a much better chance of playing regularly because you're now a more experienced player and you've obviously got a stronger track record. If Clarke goes this summer, which we might talk about later, I'm not sure, but seems still very possible, he, I think, will be going to a more established Premiership League club than Burnley were this time last year. And I actually think he'll be going with a much stronger chance of playing regularly. And for me, that's the perfect example for Jobe Bellingham. If he has another year where he plays 45 games again and he gets 10 goals, my word, he is going to have some strong offers at that point. It'll be 19. Premier League clubs are going to be queuing up. And I think there will then be really strong playing opportunities for him in the Premier League if Sunderland have not been promoted themselves. And who knows, let's be optimistic at this stage of the season. So for me, this would have it would have been a year too soon for Sunderland as well. I think they know that if he plays another, as I've just said, 40 games and scores 10 goals, I think they know the bids are going to be double next summer. And at that stage, if you haven't been promoted, Jobe's had another brilliant season, you've got a huge offer on the table, and Jobe is potentially going to the Premier League to play pretty much every week, then maybe at that point you do shake hands and you say, listen, this has worked well for everyone. So, thanks for your efforts. And so I do think it's a sensible decision if that's how it plays out. I think it's best for all parties. And I agree with you. I think it's weird because you sometimes see on social media and stuff, people say, oh, if his surname wasn't Bellingham, would there be this much hype? I actually see it the other way. If he was a Jobe Smith and he played 44 games, scored 7 goals in the Championship at 18, shown the promise he had in a number of different positions, shown that he could potentially be a genuine number 9 in the future, I think people will be absolutely raving about him. And yes, he was overplayed at times last season. There were definitely times where his level dipped. We all saw that. There was definitely some signs of fatigue. But that doesn't change my opinion of what a huge talent he is. In some ways, I actually think the Bellingham connection is sort of skewed how good he actually is for his age, because he's always been compared with this, let's be honest, absolute generational talent.
Yeah, I really rate him highly. Obviously, last year, he probably did need to be taken out of the team. At times, that didn't happen, but he came through that bad period, contributed for Sunderland really well. At times, playing under difficult circumstances, the managerial merry-go-round, the Mick Beale era, Sunderland's poor form towards the end of the season, I think it will have strengthened him. I think he'll come back even better next season. The million-dollar question, actually, Phil, is just thinking back to Lebris's press conference. He hinted at Jobe, didn't he? Where do you think, I know I'm asking you to sort of second guess here, but I'm just wondering where Lebris actually sees Jobe's. I could see it, it's testament really to his talent, but I could see Lebris looking at him and going, right, he's a number 9, we're having him up there, we're going to get him the ball, he's technical, he can turn, we're going to teach him how to be a proper striker, we're going to get him to make runs in behind, he's athletic, we'll get him to run the channels, all of that sort of stuff. But I can also see Lebris looking at him and thinking, right, he's playing as a number 8, he's physical, he's big, he can control the ball, he can pass the ball. And I could also see him as a number 10 as well. It's a really, really interesting question.
Yeah, and when we were
He'll,
talking
he'll
before,
probably put him left back or something.
yeah, left back. Yeah. Well, no, we'll do the classic Sunderland thing and convert him to a right back.
Yeah,
he can join the legion of Sunderland centre midfielders who ends up at right back, proper Sunderland heritage. No, it's a really interesting question. And again, when we spoke at the start about Saturday's actually going to be really interesting because these are all these first little clues, and nothing will be sort of final, but we'll have all these little interesting sort of clues about the way forward. I'm going to make it just a total guess, and like you say, it's pure speculation because it's fun, and that's what the summer's for. Listening to Labrise when he spoke to us about his preferred formation, and he said 4-3-3 in possession, 4-4-2 out of possession. I wonder. My prediction is I reckon Jobe is going to be a bit of a box-to-box 8/10. So if you think about 4-4-2 out of possession, what that basically means is you're going to press very, very aggressively because you want to get a player on each of the opposition centre halves. I mean, that's perfect for Jobe, isn't it? Because his athleticism, his physicality, his energy. So I kind of see him potentially being that sort of support striker, if you like, backing up in terms of the pressing. The fact that he can get into the box, he's got an eye for goal, he can score from the edge of the box. I wonder if that's maybe, from what Labrise has said, I kind of wonder if that's the best position for him. I think the only question mark over him as a 10 in the past last season has been he probably doesn't offer you the creativity that you get from Pritchard. Pritchard is very, very good at picking out those little passes on the edge of the box, those little 1-2s. We didn't see as much as that from Jobe last season. But if Sunderland are going to play a really, really sort of strong counter-attacking, high-press game, then I think that maybe will be the position for Jobe. But I said it towards the end of last season. As it stands right now, personally, I'd be looking to play him up front because I think he's Sunderland's best striker. I think Rooston showed some really good signs, but he looked to me like he looked more comfortable playing out wide. So, yeah, I'm not sold on that one either way. But I'm going to make a prediction that Labrise maybe sees him as a sort of really aggressive 8/10. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Let's move on to transfer predictions. I'll start. Phil will start sort of at the bottom, so to speak, and work upwards. Mine is pretty simple, really, pretty straightforward. I reckon Matty Young is going to head out on loan to an AFL club. I would be surprised if that didn't happen. Obviously, we've spoke about it before, though, Phil. The caveat to that is he'll probably be involved in pre-season. Regis Labrise will probably have a look at him. That does relate to the Anthony Patterson ongoing story as well. And I'll move my prediction onto that. I don't think Anthony Patterson leaves. I think Anthony Patterson will stay. And I think Matty Young will go out on loan, potentially Adam Richardson as well. But that one could get done after the transfer window because I'd expect him to sort of go to National League. There's the option Dan Cameron might go out on loan at some point as well. Robin Nichols, the academy manager, referenced that when he signed his professional deal. I find the goalkeeping situation at the club fascinating. But yeah, Matty Young to go out on loan. I think Anthony Patterson will stay for another season. As you mentioned, though, Phil, there's always the danger that the transfer window is young. And if big money did come in for Patterson, then Sunderland could be faced with an interesting decision. Having now signed Simon Moore, who's a very capable backup and could play as first choice in a championship team, you would assume, having done it for so long with Coventry. What are yours, or what are your thoughts on that, firstly?
Yeah, I agree. It's probably quite boring for the listener, but I agree with you totally on all of that. I think that the thing about the Patterson one for me is, Patterson could go for good money to be a Premier League number 2 tomorrow. I absolutely don't doubt that, and I wouldn't be surprised if Sunderland field bids for him at some point over the summer window. But I just think it actually goes a little bit back to what I was saying about Bellingham and Clark. I don't think Patterson needs to rush that. The main thing for Patterson is to be playing regular senior football. I don't think there's any need for him to go to a Premier League club, whether it be one of the big Premier League clubs or a mid-table Premier League club, without knowing that he's going to play regularly. And Sunderland, we should say, are in an incredibly strong position with Patterson. He's got 4 years left on his contract. So there is absolutely no rush for them to sell Patterson. Fair enough, if a club comes in and says to Patterson, you're going to be a number 2 this year, but over the course of the next 3-4 years, we're going to make you our definite number 1. You're going to play all the cup games. If you're in Europe, well, you can play the whatever. Then maybe that might change it, but I'd be surprised. My prediction at the moment is that Patterson stays. Moores is number 2. Young goes out on loan at the AFL. Probably Adam Richardson to the National League, because obviously in those scenarios, you can recall them pretty quickly after the transfer window, as long as they're not to an AFL club. So that seems to me like the ideal scenario. The other prediction I would make is, if Patterson goes, I think they will definitely spend money on another goalkeeper. I don't think there's any way. I don't think there's any way Simon Moore. I don't for a second see him as signed as a potential number one if Patterson leaves. I don't see that. I think if Patterson went, I think they'd have to go back into the market and spend some money. But I don't see Patterson going, obviously, with all the obvious caveats that strange things can happen.
No, fair enough. And just as a little aside, Phil, I think it's something we've discussed briefly in private, but do you think perhaps Anthony Patterson's a little bit underrated by the fan base? Obviously, there's large swathes of the fan base that do rate him, but I always think sometimes when a player's been here a while, when he's homegrown as well, that we tend to focus maybe on what he can't do rather than what he can do. His distribution is criticised a little bit, and that is an area of his game that he probably could improve on and probably is improving on. But I think he's magnificent as a shot stopper, and I don't think sometimes he gets the credit that he perhaps deserves. I think he's brilliant. I think the way he's sort of learned to command his area in these couple of years in the Championship, I think has been a real improvement. I know he still gets a little bit of stick for that every now and again, but I think he's improved immensely. I mean, just looking at his stats here, he's 24. He's got 136 games as a young goalkeeper, EFL experience as well. He's potentially got, he's the way goalkeepers go, he's potentially got like another 18, 17 years as a professional. I think he's in a marvellous position, and that he's a really good asset to Sunderland.
Yeah, I think he's a huge asset. I think the simplest way to do it is to go and look and see how many homegrown goalkeepers at his age have played as many games as he has. I'd be amazed if there's any. Obviously, there's aspects of his game that can still improve. It would be very bizarre, and he wouldn't be at Sunderland if that wasn't the case, if he was the all-round sort of. I think his command of his box, as you mentioned, is exceptional for someone of his age. I think he can be anything he wants to be. And I kind of get it to an extent. As last season in particular, I don't think he made as many game-changing saves as he did the year before, and certainly in the run to promotion from League One. If you think back to that save he made at Oxford when it was like 1-1, that reflex one, that almost great goal, and this one where he just clawed it out.
And at Wembley against Wigan as well.
Sam Vokes.
Yeah.
So I do kind of get it in the sense. I don't think there was as many of those moments last year where you were like, "Wow, he's won us 2 points there because of that save or whatever." So I'm not sort of being flippant about it, but I do just think. I think it's one of the best things about the team right now. You've got a goalkeeper of his consistency at his age. I think is astonishing, and he's either going to take someone to the Premier League or he's going to make the club a huge amount of money. And I think sometimes he gets taken for granted. I do believe that, yeah. But I kind of get that there maybe weren't as many eye-catching moments last season either.
There should be some sort of academic study on football fans taking their own players for granted, because you had it a little bit with Jordan Henderson back in the day as well. I've seen it a little bit with Dan Neil, Elliot Anderton over the years. It's really interesting, the psychology behind that. Anyway, I digress. We'll move on. Phil, we've covered the goalkeeping situation, Matty Young, Dan Cameron, Anthony Patterson, and the like. Throw me your next Sunderland summer transfer prediction.
I think the smallest amount of business will be done in defence. I think the defensive group is pretty much done. I think that you have a back four of Hume, O'Nien, Ballard, and Elise or Sirkin. Every now and then you can play with a back three, but I think that four is pretty much locked in. I don't see any of them leaving, even though I know there's interest in Hume. And you've then got Pembele, you've then got Triantis, who could go out on loan, but could potentially stay as cover while Seeds recovering. I think maybe one signing and one departure maximum in the defensive positions. I think that although last year was pretty horrendous at times, Sunderland's defensive record was pretty good. It's the area of the team that probably needs the least amount of work when you include Patterson in that. So yeah, I think Sunderland's back for the new season is pretty much locked in.
I'll add to that by predicting Yelda to play more at centre-back, perhaps.
I'd agree with that. Certainly to compete there. I think in pre-season, I think we'll see Yelda play centre-half and have the chance to prove himself in that position.
with Sealt obviously out as well, I think Yelder will be sort of the first line of cover, won't he? The other prediction I would make, Phil, would probably be Joe Anderson to leave permanently or on loan again. I don't see his future at Sunderland. Could be wrong on that. They might keep around as cover. Obviously, I think he's left-footed as well and can play at left back. But Sunderland, you'd think would be well stocked there. The other interesting one as well to throw into that, Phil, is the future of Nectar Triantis in terms of his position. Obviously, signed a long-term deal at Sunderland last summer, but when he was at Hibs, he played in midfield. That's a really interesting sort of caveat.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one because I remember he said when he first signed, when he spoke to us in the media, that he played a lot as a midfielder in his youth days in Australia, and actually he'd been fairly late conversion to centre back. Obviously, he knew the coach at Hibs really well, Nick Montgomery, who's now left. But so that obviously didn't just come completely out of the blue. It is a position he's very comfortable in. The only thing I would say is I'm now looking at it going, well, if Alan Browne and or other Championship experienced midfielder comes in, actually all of a sudden, I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of room for him to play there because you're going to have Dan Neil, hopefully, Ekwar, Browne, Rigg. I think obviously is now coming in as a contender for a centre midfield position. So, Jay Matete as well, who we might come on to in a minute. So I do think, we'll wait and see where he plays in pre-season. But I think especially when you look at the fact that Sealt is now injured, I expect Triantis in pre-season to start probably in central defence. And we'll see how he goes from there. They very much signed him as a central defender. So although I think it's an interesting option, if, a deal for Browne or whoever else, Norwood or anybody of that ilk comes in, I think that probably cements Triantis' future in the centre of defence. And it will be interesting. He could be one who goes out on loan. I think if Yelder sort of does okay in centre half in pre-season, I think that probably does free up Triantis to go and get some regular football.
Joe Anderson to depart as well, Phil Dratton?
I think so. I think possibly loan again, because I think he's got 2 years left on his deal. So if he plays another year, hopefully, regularly again. I know he went to League One last year. If he was to do that again, then that probably raises his value a little bit, and it probably gives Anderson the chance of getting a better permanent move than he might get now. So I wonder if another loan for another season might be the best avenue, and then you're either in a position where someone can say, "Wow, you've made brilliant progress. We're really pleased with how you're doing. Let's look at a new contract," or they can say, "Look, you've done well, but you're probably not going to break through here. You've got a year left. Let's get you a good move, and you can sort of crack on with your career."
I'm going to go with a bit of a more interesting transfer prediction here. It's more of a prediction actually for the next season, but I'm backing Elliot Embleton to return from injury and have an impact on Sunderland's season in some way. If he stays this summer, that is, which is another interesting sort of caveat to Sunderland's midfield options. I think perhaps that's my sort of heart rule in my head there, because I'm desperate for him to do well. Obviously, a local lad scored that goal for us at Wembley. He's had rotten luck with injuries. I really hope he can sort of come back into the fold, which is going to be difficult for him. I understand that he's had so long out with injury, but I would love to see him sort of break back into Sunderland's side and start making an impact, which, given Sunderland's options, is going to be hard. But I genuinely do think he's got the talent. He's got the pedigree. People forget he was an England youth international as well. I really like Embleton, and he can play in a number of positions, and I'd love to see him do well again next season.
Yeah, I think this podcast is very much a Embleton fan club, isn't it? We're both huge fans of Embleton. Listen, I think it's a big thing for him that he's been fully fit at the start of pre-season. The fact that he's not playing catch-up, I think, is huge. I'm not convinced on this one. If I had to make a prediction right now, I think it would be that Embleton will go, not because I don't think he's good enough. He is good enough, and I'd argue that till I'm blue in the face, and I think his versatility is massive. But I just think what you're starting to see is maybe a little bit of a bottleneck in those positions. So you've got Dan Neil, who hopefully we'll see emerge as a more sort of attacking midfielder. You've got Chris Rigg, and let's make no bones about this. Chris Rigg stayed because he's going to get minutes. He has not turned down some of the biggest clubs in Europe to sit on someone's bench.
And in his preferred position at some point.
Yeah. Adil Aushish obviously is an option. So I just think there's a little bit of a bottleneck emerging there. And my instinct with Embleton is that he'll just want to play. He's had 18 months not playing. basically any football whatsoever. I just think he's going to want to play, and he strikes me as we saw it last summer when he went to Derby on loan. He wants to play, he wants to be part of the team, and so I think there's a decent chance he leaves. The caveat to that is, as you mentioned, his versatility is massive, because the fact that you can play him as a 10, as an 8, off the left wing, off the right wing. There's a lot of positions in that squad where, behind the established players. So on the left wing, for example, Jack Clark, obviously, what a player. But at the moment, there's not really anybody else in that position who's kind of shown they're ready. So can I see Embleton working his way in as a good option in one of those positions? I definitely do. But I think with both him and Jay Matete, I think there has to be a chance that they maybe go, because I think that they're both going to want to play. They're both at important stages of their careers. And while I rate them both hugely, I think it's going to be quite difficult for them to get into the team initially. And I think they may then look at it later in the window and say, I just need to be playing, whether it's a loan or a permanent. So I would be absolutely buzzing if you're right that he comes and plays a part. And I've got no doubt he's good enough to do it. Listen, he always seems to find a way to impact the game, make goal contributions. Those kind of players are so valuable. But I do think there's a chance that the bottleneck that I outlined there in some of those key positions for both Matete and Embleton might mean that they see pastures new. But the beauty of pre-season is everyone starts on a level footing, and that's what's really exciting about them. Both Matete and Embleton
with a new head coach as well,
and it's going to be with a new head coach, exactly. And that's what's genuinely quite exciting about the next few weeks ahead. We're going to get the answers to all these questions, and the fact that they're fully fit gives them a chance.
What do you say next up, Phil? Next summer transfer prediction?
Give me a position and I'll make a prediction. Which one do you want to go to next?
Well, the only position that matters at Sunderland in transfer windows is up front.
Yeah, I think that Sunderland are going to surprise us and sign an experienced Championship striker.
Wow,
there we go.
There's the head.
Listen, it's going to be really interesting to see. The big issue, as we've outlined loads of times on this podcast, is the budget. These positions cost the most money. The Championship interest from other clubs with potentially bigger budgets will be absolutely huge. But I'm taking my cue from January, where we now know that they made a strong move for Kiefer Moore. My understanding is that there were at least 2 other what we would call Championship experienced players who they moved for. And that tells me that nothing changed in the next 6 months, did it, in terms of there weren't any more obvious answers. So I think that there was actually an appetite to try and maybe be a bit more flexible and bring in an experienced player. I would imagine it would be on loan. So I'm relatively hopeful that they will try and address that. And I'll chuck in another prediction. I think Louis Jiménez may go out on loan. I think there's a chance I don't get any impression yet that he's ready to, or they see him as ready to be that regular number 9 up front. And I think you're in an issue where you've got a position where someone actually invested quite a lot of money to bring Jiménez in last summer, and they need to protect that value. So I think he needs to be playing and he needs to be scoring goals. So if, as I suspect is going to happen, it doesn't look like he's going to play regularly through this pre-season period, I think they'll be looking, saying we need to get him out, whether it's somewhere else in the UK or whether it's to Europe, which I think is a possible option, somewhere where he can play regularly, hopefully score some goals, and then you should be in a better position to make a decision next summer. But yeah, that would be a prediction I make. I definitely think Jiménez is someone who could be in line for a loan move.
Mayenda as well, do you reckon, Phil? That's an interesting one. Would you think he would be the backup to Sunderland's main man, or he could potentially go out on loan again? He didn't actually play much football at Hibs when he joined them in January, which was a little bit of a disappointment.
I don't know. I always thought that was a strange one, because the noises previously been that they wanted to keep him at the club and help him, because he's so young. Mayenda, that's what you have to remember. He is he's a genuine youth player. And the noises around the club were, listen, we're just going to keep him. He might not play a lot, but it'll be really helpful for him to train with the team regularly, to get to understand the system better. He can, improve his language skills. He can get used to the area more. And then he kind of quite randomly went on loan to Hibs, which was just a really strange. I thought that was a really strange decision. I thought it was the wrong decision. And so my view would be to keep Mayenda around. He's still so young. It's not absolutely imperative at this point that he's playing every single week. I think you get more by helping him adjust to his very, very new surroundings, and letting him settle into training. Like I say, letting him, sort of improve his English. I think you get more out of. I think it would be more beneficial to keep Mayenda at least till till January, and then make a decision then. I'm not convinced at this stage it makes a huge amount of sense to loan him out again, but who knows.
Final one from me, Phil. Final prediction. I think the Jack Clarke saga will go all the way down to deadline day. I think he'll probably play for Sunderland again. I think it'll go to deadline day.
I think he'll play for. Yeah, I think he'll play for Sunderland again. I agree with you. I think that's going to be. Hasn't really caught fire, that story yet this summer, has it? It's been.
I think it's going to, though, isn't
quiet,
it?
but I don't think that'll last. Yeah, I don't think that'll last. My prediction is still that Clarke goes. I don't say that with absolute certainty, because I think that Sunderland's view will definitely be, because he's got 2 years left, not just one. I think they'll take the view that because it would be such a big gap in the team if he left right now, I think they'll want a huge bid, because they'll be looking at it going, well, even if, we're better off rejecting good offers that isn't a huge offer now, and if he has a brilliant season, we can still sell him for a pretty good fee next summer, which is exactly what happened with Ross Stewart. They still recouped a pretty big fee, even though he's in his last year. So that means that I think they're in a pretty strong negotiating position, and they will wait for a big bid. And I think you're right. I think Premier League teams, I don't think they're just going to come and put the money straight down on the table. I think it'll be quite a drawn-out process. I think they'll play again. I've no concerns about that. He's proven time and time again that the speculation doesn't really bother him that much. He's proven time and time again that he's not in a rush to leave. So I don't foresee there being a huge amount of issues there with it. But I agree with you. I think that'll be drawn out. If I had to put, if I had to make a prediction now, I still think he goes. But it's definitely not sort of totally clear cut.
No, I think he probably does go as well, although there is a chance that he could stay, I guess. And this relates to my final question, Phil. There's been a lot of talk about player sales at Sunderland and the model, and Sunderland sort of maybe aiming to sell one player a year for big money to sort of fund rebuilds and what they want to do at the club. Is there a chance, given all of the noise already this summer, that actually Sunderland might not sell anybody, and the deal for Clarke might not be as good as that, so they might retain him? Jobe Bellingham, early days, but he's going to stay. Patterson as well, we're predicting him to stay. Is there a chance actually that we might get to the end of the window and none of these players have gone, albeit a slim one?
Definitely. There's definitely a chance of that. I think that we saw from the last accounts that the clubs, it loses money. It's not in a incredible position financially in that sense, but it's much better than most in the Championship. There are no FFP concerns. You've got to remember those last accounts didn't include the money for Ross Stewart, which is by no means insignificant. Also, his promotion with Southampton means there's a bit more money from that deal as well. And so I don't think there's any immediate need to sell. And the contractual situations of the players means that they're not under any pressure there either. So I don't think it's not beyond the question at all that nobody departs. I would be surprised, and as I've outlined, I think there's reasons why Clarke this could be the window in which he goes, but it's not guaranteed. And I don't think Sunderland are under pressure to sell. Next summer, if Sunderland aren't in the Premier League, I think it's going to be a pretty obvious point for one, maybe two players to go, maybe even one or two more. But all the noises are that this isn't going to be a selling window. I think they've been pretty good to their word on that in the past. And I feel like the sort of contractual situations speak for themselves. So there's definitely an outside chance of that.
Excellent. Finally, Phil, what are you working on today? What can Sunderland fans read over on the website, and what will be coming in the course of the next week?
Well, I'm on annual leave as of 5 p.m. So whatever you've got planned.
Good for you.
Well, I haven't had much of a break, have I, since the season ended for various reasons. But we'll have a bit more stuff around the Alan Browne later today. I'm going to take a look at that Jobe stuff as well, which we discussed earlier in the podcast. So there'll be a bit more of an explanation of that in written form. And over the next few days, there'll still be plenty to read about from Labrisse's first press conference and from Christian Speakman as well. So there's going to be stacks of stuff. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, make sure you follow all of that. I'm going to do a shameless plug for myself as well. We had a little piece on Chris Regan, his reasons for staying at Sunderland, Kieran Louis-Dreyfus' intervention. all of that good stuff. That's up on the website. If you'd like to have a read of that, you can find it on our social media as well. Phil's Alan Browne story is across our social media accounts. Also, this podcast is available in all podcast places. Thank you if you've joined us for the live stream. We really appreciate that, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching.